of the day, I'm going to end here a little bit, is that I think that at the end of the day, everything is still heading towards more user control, more open source, more open API, more open standards, more open intellectual property. But what this is an indication of a behavior change, and that's why it's important. It's not important that it's Blizzard, it's not important that it's Vivendi, but it's important that we have millions and millions of people who are learning how to interact this way. And can we think of projects that tap that? Thank you, and we have actually a lot of time for a discussion. So if you have any comments, questions, or discussion points, I'm happy to get any more action. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to make a negative comment, but I wanted to bring the perspective of someone who is out of World of Warcraft. I mean, I played it for 3 months when the game came out, and then I stopped it because I decided I didn't like the game in the sense that for me it's a bit too combat-oriented and not enough socially oriented, but that's a matter of taste. What happened then is that almost everyone else I knew continued playing it, so I think most of my friends continue playing it, and so the problem of this is that if you're the one who's out of it, you basically start to lose your friends because they're always busy in this game every day of the year, stay connected for hours and don't talk about anything else. And of course, what you do with technology, it's your fault, it's not the technology's fault. So but I've seen people, for example, I have seen real friendships being broken. Years-long friendships being broken for something that someone acting as a guild master did. I've seen, for example, I have a friend who has 2 small babies, and when he gets home after work, instead of staying with his babies, he connects, and each and every evening he plays for hours in World of Warcraft. I have another friend who's marrying on January 14th, and he has been shortening his marriage trip because he wants to be back and start leveling in Burning Crusade as soon as it comes out. So. Again, it's not a problem of the game, it's a problem of the people, but still this is somewhat addictive. So I'm starting to wonder whether, of course most of people play it in a balanced way, so don't do this. But in some cases, should there be some consideration or safeguard for people who play too much of it? So should excessive use of this be considered an addiction, a bit like alcohol addiction or drug addiction, because it can really become that way, because this is really addictive. And the second point I wanted to raise is what kind of values do you transmit? You're right that most guilds, for example, have bylaws, so try to have some form, if not of democracy, at least have some rules, and so educate, especially these young people, to having rules, which is very important. But now, this is sort of a mid-sized European country, so 8 million people is more than Switzerland's population. Should there be some basic values? Compulsory shared values in all this community, whether you're part of a guild or not? Should they be written? And is this society owned by Blizzard? So should Blizzard really be able to do whatever they want with it, or should it be decided among those who use it? Because I don't think Blizzard really owns what's happening in World of Warcraft. So that's another issue for discussion.
Well, just so you know, we have a multi-stakeholder bottom-up consensus process in our guild. I'm just kidding. So China and Korea both have game addiction centers, and they're treating it as an addiction. I personally don't like the notion of calling it an addiction. Some people can get obsessed with anything. You can get obsessed with cleaning. You can get addicted to going to church on Sundays. We don't call it an addiction unless the man decides that it's a bad thing. And I think that there's been a huge stigma about game playing, and I think that there are huge positive benefits as well as negatives. And I think that a lot of it depends on the guilds. I think that if you have a guild that functions well. Our guild, we have lots and lots of support. We have people who are going homeless and getting a place to stay. We have couples that are getting together. We have just as many positives or more than we have negatives. But that's not necessarily widely the case. But I agree that it's something that we should look into, but I think we should look into it as how can we make this community better? Just like the internet, just like Barlow's talk, where he was going on about spam and security. Yes, there are lots of problems, but I think that calling it an addiction is like calling hacking the internet and addiction because of all the bad things that happen on the internet. So that's my personal opinion, and I don't think Blizzard has as much control as they think. So anyway, that's Annalie.
I was really interested by your observation that the World of Warcraft has a lot more working class people on it than Second Life, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you see that, maybe why you think that that's happening, and also how you see that sort of changing the culture on World of Warcraft versus Second Life.
Right. So they've come from, so this is being recorded and broadcast, so I'm going to say this somewhat tactfully, I hope. But first of all, if you look at academics, it's very interesting. Even if you go back to MUDs and MOOs, all the academics wanted to work on MOOs because it was about creativity and being smart and scripting, when in fact most of the people were playing MUDs and killing each other, and that's where all the action really was. And I think that it's a natural tendency for people who write about and talk about these things to want to talk to the bright kids. And the way that they've designed World of Warcraft is they've designed it in a commercial way, which is you figure it out in 5 minutes, anybody can play, it's not that expensive, and it's trying to target as many people as possible. So just the demographic, so when Corey, I love him and bless his soul, talks about 80% of all the users in Second Life create objects in script. Wow, gee, that's either one means that you're making a lot of dumb people smart, or you're only attracting smart people. And I think that what happens is that you create an interface that's focused on the creative people, sort of the gifted and talented of the internet, and you attract those kinds of people. And World of Warcraft, it's color-coded. I have my purple gear, I have my green gear. It's very simple, but you shouldn't get fooled by is that beyond the simplicity is that there's a lot of complexity. And the other thing is that you realize is that there are a lot of smart people who are illiterate. Right, and you can play Warcraft and still be illiterate. And one of the things that, again, I don't like the word slumming, but it's kind of like, so I dropped out of college to become a disc jockey in a nightclub because I found that the dynamics between the people in the nightclub, between the drug dealers and the kids who had AIDS and the owner and the mafia, that was a lot more interesting and real to me in terms of caring, in terms of reality, than the interaction between the professors and the students at University of Chicago physics, right? And so I thought I would learn a lot more about life, sitting around negotiating with the drug dealers not to sell drugs to my friends who have AIDS. And to me, that was really interesting and important. And I think one of the things is that just because you're working class and illiterate doesn't mean you're socially inept. And in fact, maybe you're socially more capable because your brain's not all stuck in this kind of ivory tower thing. And so that's why, to me, studying World of Warcraft is... So to answer your question, I think it's demographically, scientifically random just because of the way it's designed and marketed. But I think it's interesting because the effect of that is a diversity that you don't get in other places. And one last thing. There's a very interesting gender thing, by the way, which I'll send you some stuff, but like role-playing game servers where you kind of have to play your part. There's a study that's showing that, an observation that there are very few alpha males who want to play that role, and so they're very strong women, and they don't have enough men. Most of the lieutenants in my guild are women, which is, I think, somewhat similar to projects like Wikipedia and things like that. And it's a very interesting gender thing going on as well in the game.
I was just wondering if you say like there's half of the people in the game are Chinese and actually the rules are made by Blizzard. Isn't the Chinese government somehow concerned that like 4 million people playing and communicating within an environment which is owned by a foreign company? And is there any indications that that is actually used for other purposes than just playing?
Well, the Chinese government is concerned, and the Chinese Warcraft has different rules. So after you play a certain number of hours, you start degrading, and there are, it's limited. So the U.S. one you can play all you want. The Chinese one, it changes, and there definitely is some interaction, but the Chinese are not as. This is a pretty commercial thing, and the guy who runs it in China is fairly well connected. So I don't know exactly the answer, but the Chinese are concerned enough so that online gaming isn't considered a good thing, and it's considered an addiction. But I think they're just having a hard time shutting it down. And the thing is that Blizzard, with all of their problems, they have a huge history of making a lot of content. And one of the difficult things is to make a game that will last for years like this, the content and the lore has to be very rich. And so inside the game you have jokes and stories from all the old games like Diablo and StarCraft and and so that history has helped Blizzard a lot. And that's why a lot of the Asian games, while they have some clever things, the gameplay balance and the richness of the content are lacking. And so even in China, where you have huge games, Warcraft is still by far the number one. Anyone else?
Yeah, maybe two things. One to this addiction thing, and then like a positive aspect. I also played the beta, and I knew like after 3 weeks, okay, this or continue studying. So I continued studying, and a lot of my friends still play. They smoked tons of weed before and played Counter-Strike. Now they do the same and play World of Warcraft. And spend like 80 or 90% of their wake time playing World of Warcraft, which is pretty much. I think it's okay because they can decide on their own what they want to do with their life. But I mean, most of them stopped studying or stopped working and live on social welfare now. And I know actually nobody that can handle it. So this is just maybe one aspect from me personally. The other thing I want to say is, from a scientific perspective, I think it's very interesting because you can see people interacting in a virtual space or like cyberspace. And I think making this more popular with like big games like World of Warcraft will be pretty interesting. So it's just two things.
So just one more last thing on the addiction thing. I mean, I know people in Japan that are retiring who have never been home before midnight for their whole business career, and it's healthier than going drinking every night and getting drunk till you forget everything. I think that if you have an obsessive nature, you'll find something to get obsessed about. I think that being obsessed about something where you're going to have to run into other people and at least interact is better than being obsessed about something that and I assume weed isn't that bad for you. I mean, you can do two things. You can sort of dive into a kind of social obsessive thing like going bar hopping, or you can recede into something like heroin. But I think that, it's a very difficult thing. I mean, I do know that people have problems, but the question for me is would you just be replacing that problem with something else, or is there something that's, because it's addictive because it's very interesting, but first of all, it's not physiologically addictive like heroin. But it is kind of the first dose is free, so that part is the same. But anyway, I think there are parallels, but I still believe that we can kind of learn to do it, and we have to understand how to talk our friends out of it. But just like we talk our friends out of everything else obsessive that's available to us to do, I think. I think we have a little time if anybody wants a comment, or if anyone's on a US server, feel free to send me an email, and if you're interested in joining a guild. So I guess that'll wrap it up. Thanks, everyone.